Youth Symposium, and then she also came and did another training for us after that too. So just a quick intro for those of you who don't know her. Allison has been working in the field of child welfare for, do you want me to say how many years, Allison, or do you prefer I just cut that part? For a few years.
Goodness, badge of honor, I feel like. So no.
There we go. It was the audio. It said because it said join by phone.
Whoops, we got somebody on there. I think they'll get muted. Anyways, so Allison is, she spent over 25 years working with families and children who have experienced trauma, neglect, exposure to violence. She's a nationally recognized expert in the field of child welfare, child mental health, attachment, family systems, adoption, permanency, and trauma. She's the executive director of the National Center on Adoption and Permanency and was the child welfare consultant for the Paramount movie Instant Family. And hopefully most of you saw it. And if you haven't seen it, go watch it. And at the end of it, look at all the adoptive families that are at the end, because we have about 6 families on there who adopted through Aspiranet and Tulare County Child Welfare. And you will see their pictures at the end of the movie, which is super cool. And Allison also recently just co-authored this book. Look, I brought Show and Tell, 7 core issues in adoption and permanency. And it really does actually sit next to my desk. I didn't do that just for today. That's a true story. So she's really fabulous. She's very passionate about the kids and the families that she serves. And I think that you guys are really going to enjoy her today. So I'm going to go off camera. Take it away, Allison.
Without further ado, thank you, Julianne. Thank you. We adore you. We adore your families. By the way, that was really fun to pull so many of your families into the Instant Family experience for all of us. I do realize I scored the gig of a lifetime as being the consultant for the movie. And again, like Julianne said, for those of you that haven't seen it, it really is a movie that captures your experience. One of the things that we're so excited about was for our families that are touched by foster care, kinship, and adoption, when they go to movies, they typically see movies about kind of traditional families, you know, kind of old-fashioned families, but they often don't see a full reflection of their family's story. So if you haven't seen it, it belongs to you. It's your movie, it's your story. So I really hope that you see it, because the roller coaster of emotions that the family goes through, you all are living that. So I was just really happy and thrilled to be a part of that. So I'm going to get me off the screen because I still see me. So I have to shrink me over here. And I'm not quite sure how to do that. Me over. There we go. So welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. A few things, because Julianne did a nice introduction, but what I also want you to know is that I'm a mom. I'm a parent. And really everything I do is also taken through that parent lens. So not just kind of a professional lens. I'm a mother of, and I want you to track this with me, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4. 3 biological, and we have our nephew who we've had for about 7 years. So we have a house full of boys. They're young men now, so they're older, but much of what you'll be kind of picking up from me is a lot of my just in the trenches experience as being a mother with a lot of boy energy and lived experience as a kin parent as well. So these are new times that we're in. So we know parents are under a great deal of distress. So when I was putting together this experience for you, this webinar, which is this week and next week, really wanted to kind of walk you through some ways of thinking about not just the current dilemma and the kind of crisis that we're in, but the opportunities that this is creating. And it is creating really some terrific opportunities that we want to help you take advantage of, both for yourself and for your kids and for your family. So I'm going to be walking you through some parenting tips and tools to reduce toxic stress. All of a sudden, my My toggling isn't working. Let's see. Yes, it's working. So hopefully you guys can see my screen as well. As Julianne said, I am the co-author of this very kind of thick 450-page book with my co-author, Sharon Roja. And you'll hear a little bit about the 7 core issues in adoption and permanency. But the thing I want especially parents to hear right now, and these are foster, adoptive, and kinship parents, is that Sharon and I right now, we're working on the workbook, the Parent Workbook that goes with this book, which will have activities both for the parents and for children and teens, all based on the core issues. So kind of really exciting news. It won't be out till next year because we're actively working on it. But some of the things you'll hear me talk about today are going to be actual activities in the book. Again, it's going to be structured like a workbook. So it'll be really easy to use for parents, and we're super excited and working on it now. So that's some exciting news. For those of you that don't know me and the 7 core issues, I just want to do kind of a quick introduction to kind of what the 7 core issues is really all about. The experience of adoption and permanency for all members of the constellation creates lifelong and intergenerational issues and complexities. These are normative issues, kind of normal issues and complexities. So one of the things Sharon and I wanted to do as we were writing the core issues was really to explain and normalize these issues so as to not pathologize them. That's some of what has been done historically in the world of adoption and foster care. For example, children's grief and loss connected to the losses connected to their families of origin. In some ways, that's become pathological. Children don't know what to do with all their grief. It turns into anger, and then we put diagnostic categories on it, oppositional and defiant. And so there's a tendency in our history when we don't understand the complexities connected to the experience of relational trauma, traumatic losses that children experience. We're not assisting often children with their grief and their losses through each developmental stage. So these losses become unrecognized, unacknowledged, unhealed. So of course it creates a lot of internal distress. So much of what we wanted to do was to kind of walk through an understanding of what these 7 core issues are. It really gives a roadmap, which is really what that visual on the screen is helping us kind of think about. That the core issues provide this roadmap where we can depathologize the complexities and especially the traumatic losses that come with the experience of adoption, kinship, and foster care. In the book, at the end of each chapter, and by the way, I should name the core issues for those of you that don't know them, that the core issue in the center, it's like a hub of a wheel, is loss, because without traumatic losses, there is no adoption, there is no foster care, these are traumatic losses for all members of the constellation, meaning parents as well. Birth first parents and adoptive kinship foster parents have their losses that they bring to this experience. But the ones that lose the most and are impacted the most are, of course, the child, because they're experiencing primal losses that disconnect them from their families of origin. And these are 2 families of origin, their birth first mother and their birth first family, or paternal side of the family, and all the extended relations on those familial trees. So even if the adoption happened at birth, those children kind of wake up to their losses, because babies don't cognitively kind of think about their losses. But once that child is 5 and 8 and 10 and 15, they're not only thinking deeply about their losses and wondering, questioning why, how did it happen, what happened, was it my fault, did I do something, was it me? They're feeling significantly. They have large, big feelings connected to these losses, and these losses can create feelings of rejection and abandonment. What did I do, as we try to figure out why the loss occurred? Why did this happen? Those initial losses leading to rejection can create feelings of guilt or shame. shame in that maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I did something wrong. Those can lead to those losses, the need to grieve, which is a process. If we're not naming the losses, we don't know what we're grieving. So many of the losses in adoption and foster care feel ambiguous, like how, and where are the rituals connected to that? How do I grieve these losses that nobody talks about? So you can see where these can create ongoing issues and challenges. The next core issue is identity, which is often a very significant issue, especially for the adoptee or the child stuck in foster care. If I don't know where I came from, if I don't know where I came from, if I don't have relationships with those family of origin folks, my culture, my race, my ethnic identity, who am I? Largely, especially in adolescence, as we're trying to figure out who we are, we have to understand where we came from. And we come from familial trees. We are rooted in those familial systems. They help us feel a sense of rootedness or not, which is often some of the challenge for our kids. And there's intimacy. And intimacy and identity create this kind of, they're like two sides of a coin. If my identity is a challenge, if I have what we call identity bewilderment, if I struggle with, I don't know who I am, it's hard to get close to someone. Because if I am really going to have emotional intimacy with someone, I need to know who I am to be able to know what I need and ask for my needs to be met and feel comfortable and relaxed to create that emotional intimacy. So identity and intimacy are issues connected to adoption and permanency. And the last core issue is the issue of control and or mastery. The issue of adoption, foster care, and kinship care can create significant control issues coming from feelings of powerlessness and helplessness. I had no control. Children often feel really out of control, having no control. So what you often see them try to do is fight for control. I want control. So we get some oppositional, defiant behaviors from this ultimate last loss of control, which wasn't a minor loss for children. Most of us grown-ups have never experienced the kinds of losses that our children experience. And these will be grieved ongoingly. Again, it's why we say these losses are lifelong and are intergenerational. The goal is to get to mastery, that kind of last issue. How do I get to mastery through the experience of adoption and foster care, where I can get to the gains, where I can get to the healing, because adoption creates this duality. It comes from loss and pain, these core original losses, but it also can create healing and connection and rootedness. So that duality is what's required for us to kind of look at as we're getting to this place of mastery. So I just gave you the kind of fastest down and dirty on the core issues. Sharon and I, those of you that went a little bit longer just on the core issues, if this is a new concept, this lens of the core issue, this conceptual framework. Sharon and I last November did a talk that's on YouTube, and you can easily go on, it's accessible. If you go on Google, not on Google, I'm sorry, YouTube. I'm sorry, Julianne's going, Allison, get the reference right. If you go on YouTube and you put in Allison Maxon, you'll see a talk come up called the 7 Core Issues that Sharon and I did together at the Newport Beach Public Library, and it's recorded there. It's about an hour long, and you'll see it was an audience of foster adoptive kin parents mostly, and we were doing a presentation on the core issues, and that'll give you a bit more teasing out of the core issues. But we are here to talk about toxic stress. But I needed to give you, I feel like, the core issues so we really can see what our families that are hunkering down in this new normal, what I'm calling the new abnormal, the new normal, that for children who've already been exposed to significant amounts of toxic stress, traumatic losses, neglect, abuse, relational trauma, and attachment disruptions, this is a different experience for them. They don't have the freedom like other kids who are in the non-traumatized world to just kind of relax and enjoy this experience. It may create, and most often does create, more distress for them, because if they have layers of toxic stress already, this new experience can add more distress on top of that, more chaos, more unknown, more concern, more fear, because many of our kids have tremendous internalized fears because they've experienced a lot of disruptions or chaos or abuse or trauma. So their alarm systems internally are more in hyper arousal. So you'll see them more quickly go into distress. So it's why, especially things like this that really give parents more tools, because our parents do need more tools, because our kids that come from significant trauma backgrounds have more needs. But this time also creates lots of opportunities. So we want to be able to take advantage of these opportunities as we're hunkering down. So the graphic in front of you, I want to explain, this is taken directly from our book on the 7 core issues. The phrase in the middle, constellation members, those are all of the folks touched by this thing called adoption and permanency. So include yourself, if you're a foster parent, adoptive parent, or kin parent. And your family system, by the way, is impacted by adoption and foster care. The birth first parents and their extended family are part of the adoption permanency constellation. And of course, the child and siblings. And by the way, when they grow up, their children impacted. When we say intergenerationally, when we're moving children from one family system tree onto another family system tree, multiple generations are impacted, both by the losses from the birth first family tree, for instance, and by the grafting onto this familial tree. We're changing those family systems intergenerationally. So the 7 core issues that I just walked you through is on the bottom. Those are the foundational experiences and issues for constellation members. But all of these constellation members, because of those core issues and the experience of foster care and adoption, have their attachment styles and systems impacted. And trauma is an ongoing issue. For the child, more specifically, developmental trauma, and we'll be speaking about that because all trauma is not created equal. So the way I'd love for you to kind of visualize this is the triangle is that all these issues are connected. So I couldn't, as a professional, as a therapist, someone working in the field with any of our kids and families, just focus on trauma. Because whenever we're talking about trauma, it's relational trauma and it impacts attachment, always. And the core issues, because they're connected to traumatic losses and the adoption foster care experience, are always in play. So we see these as always being interconnected issues. So you'll hear me going in and out of speaking about each of them and providing some context, because some of the goal is we want to always strengthen the attachment caregiving system, which is what our parents are doing and what this new normal, this new hunkering down that we're doing provides opportunities to actually strengthen the attachment caregiving system and do some healing of trauma, including old trauma. And we'll be speaking to those core issues that surface through this experience. So I want to kind of show you that reference. By the way, we spell it out a bit more in the book. So if any of this is sounding like you want to learn more about it, the book is a great reference piece. All children, including those placed at birth, experience attachment disruptions and relational trauma that will be processed through each stage of development. This is often, I say, what's most tricky for parents, because we often think, well, I got my child 5 years ago when they were 5. Why are things still coming up when the child's 10? And we're going to be speaking to the complexity of developmental trauma and attachment disruptions and how those experiences get encoded and embedded within sensory memory. So, of course, it creates ongoing triggers, but those triggers become opportunities for deeper healing. So we want to be able to look at what those maybe behavioral or sensory triggers are, especially during toxic stress, as a way that that child is still communicating historical trauma. And if we're reading that communication correctly, we can figure out how to respond to meet those needs that are now surfacing maybe through a different developmental stage. Because when the child was 5, maybe what their mind and brain could understand was this, and now that they're 10, they can understand this, or 15, they can understand much more. So what we see is a redigesting of old trauma, which is not a bad thing, because the child is most often still trying to understand the what, the how, and the why. You know, why did this happen? How did this happen? Why did it happen to me? Why does it still hurt? Because they still have feelings and emotions associated with this old pain or the experience of adoption or foster care. And those aren't negative things. Those are actually things that a healing relationship can help to address. So we're going to start with you guys. So everybody, all the adults, which I'm thinking it's only adults right now, all the adults on this webinar, we're going to start with you. And I want to do a little exercise to kind of have us focus a minute on the self, yourself, and I mean kind of all aspects of self, because we're actually pretty complex beings. So I want you to kind of go along with this guided visualization with me. Those of you that are comfortable closing your eyes, I'm going to spend a few minutes and take you on this guided visualization so we can begin with yourself. And I do this because lots of times parents and professionals with children of high trauma want, you know, we want some quick fixes for, you know, this behavior, just tell me what to do with it. But every aspect of what a child with relational trauma needs is anchored in a healing relationship. And that healing relationship starts with you. It starts with yourself, your house, and especially the emotion in your house. It starts with you. So I typically start these kinds of trainings with you in particular. So I want you to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. And I want you to, in your mind's eye, see a great big house. And this is your house. It belongs to you. You were born with the basic structure of this house, and it has a foundation. It's rooted in a family, in a culture, in a community, with rituals and with language. It has values that you learn quickly. It has a belief system, cultural, ethnic, religious belief system that we experience through the rituals and the celebrations and the events that occur, especially while we're young. In this house, we have roles. I was born into a family as a daughter or a son. I was born into a family as the firstborn or the secondborn or the lastborn. I have siblings. I have parents. As we age in this house, we add roles. So as I grow, I become a student. That's a role. I go to college. I become a girlfriend or a boyfriend. I get married. I become a parent. I become a spouse. These are all additional roles that I take on within my house. Each of these roles is like a different room in your house. So we're often a bit different depending on our role. So for instance, if I have aging parents, I may be moving into doing more caregiving for them. So we're adapting in these roles, in these different rooms that we have. If I'm a new parent, that might be a new room, a new role for me. And I have to incorporate this room into my broader identity. I have feelings in each of these roles within my house. I experience these feelings over time. I first learn my emotions and my feelings experienced as a child within my family of origin when I'm young. So the emotions that are swirling around in that house within our first family when we're small really set an emotional tone for us. Was there a lot of joy? Was there a lot of love? Was there a lot of chaos? Was there a lot of yelling? Were there chaos and issues and struggles? Or was there structure and joy and celebration and extended family? So think about just the different feelings that you have when you were younger. If you are in your house and you look up, you'll look into your attic where your hopes and your dreams lay. When you were younger, you may have hopes or hopes and dreams about what you wanted to be, or what kind of family you wanted to have, or how many kids you wanted to have, or what you wanted to do with your talents and your skills. And these hopes and dreams change over time. So I want you to kind of anchor into and think about yourself, the complexity of yourself as a house. We aren't one thing, we are many things. We have thoughts and feelings and beliefs about ourselves. Am I a good person? Am I a valuable person? Am I a worthy person? If I feel good about my house, it's easier for me to move into loving relationships because I feel my house has value, that I'm worthy, that I'm valuable. If a lot of bad things have happened in my house, especially when I'm younger, I may have learned to have less value for my house. I might have poor self-esteem and lower self-worth connected to my house. All of this is going to impact how we currently are experiencing what's happening in the world, connected to the external stress in our environment. So if you guys will kind of rejoin me, those of you that closed your eyes, rejoin me, and I want you to kind of think about this as we're moving forward with today and what we're going to do next week with our internal experience of stress. Has a lot to do with what happened early on in the interior of our house. How we experience stress from the outside into our house has a lot to do with the resiliency and the skills that we already have internally. And those can be kind of thought strategies, how I think about stress, how I think about myself, and emotional strategies, how I bounce back from stress. Do I recover quickly from stressful events? Or when something bad happens, do I kind of circle the drain and go into this spiral and downward cycle where I can be stressed for days or weeks about an event or something that happened? So these inner skills are really critically important for our feelings of life success, whatever that means to you. And it's much of what we want to be focusing on in ourselves and with our children. And it's thinking about the complexities of these internal skills. And we're going to be talking a lot about this. But I wanted you to be thinking about yourself as a house. Those of you that want some fun homework, I encourage you to kind of get a big poster board and tease out all these different parts of yourself, kind of doing what I call your internal work. Because if there's any rooms where there's conflict or unresolved pain or trauma, it's really good to go in and explore that because they can impact our current relationships, how we feel about ourselves, whether with our partners or with our children or with our significant friendships or partnerships. So if there's any distress in the interior, it certainly impacts how we're able to move into relationships with others. So self is a house. Toxic stress coming from the outside. I want you to look at this. We're all experiencing some toxic stress, right? And I want to kind of give us a way to really be thinking about toxic stress, because those of us that can focus more on our interior skills and resiliencies and strengthening those will fare a bit better. In fact, you may already be experiencing, like you may be doing better right now. Some of you, I've worked with some of my parents that are like, I think I'm enjoying this right now. And I have other families that are really, really struggling. So what is toxic stress? I'm going to kind of give you kind of a way to think about this. And what are we supposed to do with all this stress? So the first thing I want us to think about is, you can see the visual there. We experience stress through our senses. So what we see, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What are the sounds that I'm hearing? What am I smelling? My olfactory system. What am I taking into my olfactory system? What am I tasting? What am I touching? What's coming into my mouth? Is it nurturing? Many of us want to be eating ice cream right now, or mashed potatoes, or because those are comfort foods. And what am I touching? Not just me touching, but what is coming into my touch system? Because many of our children who have a lot of trauma are touch aversive. Doesn't mean they don't need touch, but they've already taken in a lot of toxic stress through their touch system. So I want us to really be sensitive and mindful moving forward that stress is experienced through the senses. And I say this because many grown-ups, us grown-ups that are older, adults, the older we get, the more we experience the world in a cerebral way. We experience the world a lot through our thought processes. So we kind of live in our mind much of the time. That is not where children live. Children really do live in a sensory experience. So many of our kids are much more sensory aware even than we are. So our children might sense threat way before we do. Because remember, many of us kind of live in our thought stream. Those of you that are already like, what am I having for dinner and what am I doing later? That's us living in a very kind of cerebral experience. And the older we get, that's more common. But we all experience stress through our senses, meaning stress responses we experience in our body. So much of what I'm going to be talking about today and next week is bottom-up healing. Bottom-up healing for not just our children, but for us too, because we have to understand that we experience this stress through our bodily sensory system. So this top-down approach, meaning kind of talking, let's talk about stress and talk, tends to be less effective, and especially for children, because they're less cerebral than us. But talking also doesn't connect to our bodily system, which is especially where toxic stress is, first of all, triggered and then stored and then needs to be discharged. So those become really important conceptual pieces, because you'll hear me kind of adding on when we talk about examples and things to be doing, that we're going to be talking about bottom-up ways to manage toxic stress, both for kids and for us. Hope you guys are with me. So the first thing I want to also give you is that there's good stress and there's bad stress. All of you guys, I made some handouts just for you guys for this training that can be easily printed out and kind of put up on your fridge. So you don't have to kind of worry about taking notes or things. I actually wanted to make sure you had things written down that might be helpful tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. You have a handout in your materials section. If you clicked it up, these handouts are in there. This one's called What to Do with All That Stress. And it walks you through kind of good stress versus bad stress. Good stress versus bad stress. I want us to be thinking about it like this, especially as a grown-up. See that little baby down there on the slide? The moment you and I came into the world, and every human, we start experiencing stress. Babies experience, toddlers, latency age kids, teens, every mental state is filled with new stress. Baby, toddler, latency, then each step, there are different stressors. Children have milestones they need to be learning. Babies have to learn to regulate their distress. Toddlers have to learn to crawl, walk, run, eat with a fork. They have to learn all these things that basically create stress. And by the way, a lot of that stress is not bad stress. It's good stress. It's actually how we're wired to learn, through adversity. So all of these kind of adverse or stressful experiences teach us, they challenge us. It's like learning to climb a mountain. The difference is children that are afforded healthy attachment, meaning that baby is not meeting their own needs. They can't experience stress on their own and learn on their own. They can't feed themselves or learn to do really anything by themselves. They're completely helpless. They need attachment. That's when bad stress becomes good stress, because parents can modulate appropriate levels of stress. For instance, a child is a little whiny because they're hungry, like they start whining, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. That's a little bit of good stress. It's when they start to escalate and now they're in the throes of a complete meltdown where their mind is disorganized and now a stress response, an alarm response has been triggered, and now their whole bodily system is stressed, let's say for an hour. That's bad stress. That's toxic stress. But good stress, we all experience. So I don't want us to think that kind of stress is the enemy, but I'm going to really work to differentiate between bad stress or toxic stress through different stages of development, because there is a significant difference. So what is this thing called toxic stress? So toxic stress isn't necessarily an event. It refers to the body's physiological response to the stress. For instance, you and I might experience stress in a different way. Something that's really stressful for me might be easy for you. It might kind of roll off you like, water on a duck's back. And vice versa. Something that's really stressful for you might not be a stressor for me. A lot of that has to do with, I'll go back to your house for a minute. Remember the interior of your house? A lot of that has to do with how much toxic stress you experienced as a child. So children that have had significant traumatic experiences, relational trauma, exposure to toxic stress on each stage of development. So think baby, toddler, latency, multiple attachment disruptions, foster care, they experience significant toxic stress. So their bodily system is almost on a constant alarm state or in an alarm state, where even if we put them in a safe environment, now their bodily systems have become automated around hyper-vigilant stress responses. And that may be a lot of the kids that you're parenting currently, because that's not unusual for our kids from care. In toxic stress, I want you to kind of think about this being baseline, and I'm going to give you a way to think about this. Your body, hopefully right now, as you're listening to me, is in a calm state, what we call homeostasis, which is a relaxed state, meaning your heart rate is at a resting rate and your respiratory rate is at a resting rate. When you're in this state, all parts of your brain and your bodily system are in a relaxed, alert state, which, by the way, is the best way to learn. When our body and our mind are in a relaxed, alert state, our baseline is homeostasis. It's that relaxed, alert state, and you can really listen, for instance, to the word I'm saying. You can look at me. You can track where I'm going. That's optimal. Many of your kids may have never experienced. So much of how we experience toxic stress has a lot to do with the interior of our house. So was our house always on fire when we were little? Was there chaos? Was there drug use? Was there alcoholism? Was there threat? Was there abuse? Was there, how does one learn on the interior of their house to relax when they're experiencing chronic toxic stress? So that's kind of the bad news. The good news is we can always, if we take a bottom-up approach, train our bodily systems to learn to find homeostasis. We actually have to retrain the body and the mind to find calmness. Yes, it is very possible to do. It may be harder depending on how much toxic stress either us or our kids have experienced, but we can do that retraining. So the difference between toxic stress and tolerable stress is the extent to which people can manage the stress and feel some sense of safety in their body. I feel safe. And being in control, which brings our stress system back to a baseline or homeostasis. And remember, that's that resting heart rate, resting respiratory rate. So the goal is when my stress gets too high, I want to quickly be able to bring it down to baseline. The longer, especially for our children, that they're in that hyper-aroused, distressed, toxic stress state, the worse it is on all of their neurobiological systems. So if they had 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years of toxic stress exposure, you can understand it's going to take their system a longer time to relearn how to find baseline. So some of our kids, it may take 6 months or a year or 3 years, even with the parents doing everything they can do within that home environment to help retrain their system to find calmness and relaxation. And there are lots of things that parents can be doing, so we're going to address that as well. So the signs and symptoms, we're going to stay with our stress for a minute. So what are the signs and symptoms of adult toxic stress? So when we're in distress, I want you to imagine that if your house, I want you to go back to your house for a minute, house literally was on fire, like your house is burning down, and I'm your neighbor and I come over and I say, hey, can I get your, bundt cake recipe? And you're like, you can't even, like, first of all, you might want to, scratch my eyes out, like, you might not even be able to find the words because you're not in a relaxed baseline state when your house is burning down. So you can't even go back into that file in your memory and go, oh, sure, Allison, let me pull out that little recipe and here you go. Because on the interior of your house, it's on fire. So it interrupts our learning, our cognitive process, our narrative. And by the way, these are neurobiological processes. There's a good reason why when we're in that state, we can't go back and retain a file that was put in there. So it's often that when we're really experiencing toxic stress, that we can sometimes even feel stupid or dumb or like I can't remember anything or I can't even find language. I can't find the words because my house is on fire. When we're there, we're actually kind of stuck in our bodily sensory system. So our mind, our cognitive processes, those our prefrontal cortex, and we're going to talk about the brain in a little bit, but our prefrontal cortex is actually oxygen deprived. So it's harder for us to find our language receptors. So there's a good reason why when our house is on fire, we don't want to use a lot of talk. This is true for children, and this is true for us. So when we're really distressed, we want to take a bottom-up approach as well, because what does anyone need when the house is on fire? And I know I can't hear you guys, which is a little frustrating for me because I love to hear you guys. When our house is on fire, you need someone to put out the fire, which has little to do with talking. So I want you to, we're going to move more with that, but it has little to do with talking. I need someone to come and put out the fire. So I don't need somebody lecturing me about what I did wrong to make the fire or coming down on me or making me feel bad or guilty, or I need someone having empathy for my pain. Being on fire, being in the middle of toxic stress inside my house is painful. I'm anxious, I'm worried, my house is burning down, what's going to be happening? I'm in a fear state. So I don't need from the outside in, again, the lecture or somebody minimizing it, or it's okay, be okay, or any of those pieces that make me feel more distressed or that you don't see my pain. You don't see that my house is on fire. Adult toxic stress is impacted in this experience for us as well. So it can impact, again, our house is on fire. Learning memory, we can be more vulnerable to addiction, to what we call maladaptive coping strategies. So alcoholism, drug addiction, pornography, social isolation. Think about any of those maladaptive coping strategies. They tend to not help the fire, they tend to intensify the fire. So we have healthy coping strategies and maladaptive coping strategies. If my house is on fire and I am feeling so much pain and toxic stress, sometimes what I'm looking for is a out. Like, what might make me feel better in this moment is to not feel the pain. So a way for us to understand, especially those current folks we may be connected to that are in the throes of addiction, it's often they come with a history of relational trauma and poor coping strategies. So it's I just don't want to feel what I'm feeling. I'm in so much pain internally. When we're experiencing toxic stress, we can be overreactive, hypersensitive. We can have increased stress response, which usually means little things become bigger things for us. So I might be, I saw somebody a couple weeks ago lose it in the grocery store, like get so upset because they didn't have, something that she wanted. And she was yelling at the manager and just absolutely going off on this person. And in the moment, I understand that we can overreact to things that maybe other people don't understand in that moment. And no one knows what was going on the interior of her house. So I certainly have empathy for those of us that really struggle right now because we already had trauma or toxic stress or challenges with addiction, or we have fewer support systems. Greater vulnerability to physical and mental illness challenges. Chronic pain or migraines. So this current environment can create more distress on top of other stressors that we're already experiencing. Toxic stress, that last one, creates a more compromised immune system. So it's why I focused this first part of the webinar really on us, because we have to be on our interior of our house attending to our own internal distress, because we could be compromised. And you are really that lifeline to children and vulnerable families if you're a professional. So we really have to nurture and attend to our own toxic stress and develop a plan to reduce it. So your first piece of homework, if you're not going to do the house, by the way, those of you that actually want to get a big poster board and draw your house with a foundation and the beliefs and actually do that, that's a fun exercise to do. But the second piece of homework, on the back of this, it's 10 things to de-stress my body and my mind. And each of us is so different. My list would look really different than your list. But I challenge you, coming from the interior of your house, yourself, to come up with a list of 10 things that you're doing to decrease your interior toxic stress. So if you come up with 10 things, you may not be doing those every day, but I challenge you to at least do minimally 2 or 3 every day. So those of you that have incorporated walking every day, or eating healthier every day, or singing and dancing every day, or those things that actually release toxic stress, kudos to you. And I challenge you to do this list and then put it on your fridge as a reminder, because your emotional well-being is everything to the child that you are parenting. So the better we are tending to our needs, the more emotionally refueled we are, the better we are able to not just attend to our kids' needs, but read and attune with what they need from us. And this is all an emotional serve and return. So if we're depleted or we're distressed, our stress quickly becomes child stress. Mm-hmm. Children live within the emotion of the family environment. They live inside that emotion. And adults set the tone of that family's emotional tone within that family. So we want to be able to set that tone, but we have to be really mindful and attendant to our distress. So toxic stress is the enemy, not just for children, but our toxic stress. So toxic stress impacts brain development. Brain important? Brain is very important. Allison doesn't go anywhere without talking about the brain. The effects of toxic stress on brain. So not just the child's brain, but especially the child's brain, because their brain is still developing. We actually had the decade of the brain in the early 90s. So we learned so much about brain development. And the little children that are in your homes, their brain is still developing. So that tells us there's a significant opportunity to impact, especially the limbic structures of their brain, which is much of what I'm going to be talking about. Prolonged stress can slow or even stop brain development and physical growth. So I want you to imagine that toxic stress, attachment disruptions, or even being in foster care or in temporary care, children can most often feel like they're treading water. They're not able to really thrive. So it can stunt brain development and physical growth because all of their emotional resources are going to survival. They're not going to thriving because they're not rooted. They're not rooted in permanency. If children feel like they're going to move tomorrow, or they're not permanently connected or rooted in a family system, they're surviving and treading water. You know, when is the ball going to drop? When am I going to move again? When is all this going to, happen again? All this chaos, pain, stress going to happen again? They can't relax into permanency and then begin to thrive. Prolonged exposure, and I should say toxic stress. Let's go to the brain for a minute. So toxic stress, when we experience stress, what happens in our brain and neurobiological systems is we release cortisol and adrenaline. Both of those are stress hormones. Those stress hormones that get released into our body when we're distressed actually create energy. They create energy in our body because those stress hormones are primed to do very simple things. They're primed to help us survive. So they trigger a fight, flight, or freeze response. In order to do that, those stress hormones take oxygen from our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, shunt blood and oxygen into our hands, so we might want to punch something, to our large muscles in our legs. I might want to run, I might want to flee, because I'm sensing threat and toxic stress. Again, think about the house burning down. I have energy in my body, and that energy needs to be discharged. The energy just doesn't magically go away. This is often what can be confusing for parents and kids, because now if I have energy, how do I get this out of my body? Sitting down and just talking doesn't get that energy out of my body. And by the way, these stress hormones can hurt my immune system, can take a toll because it's triggering a stress response in my system. So my bodily states are not in calmness and relaxation. I'm internally distressed. I may have trouble sleeping. I may eat more or eat less. I may have nightmares. I may hoard. I may not want to talk to anybody. I may isolate. So prolonged exposure with these stress hormones takes a neurobiological toll on our system. So to boil all that down for folks, when we are experiencing that initial toxic stress, that energy needs to be discharged. So the body has to move, whether it's the child or the grown-up. Think about walking every night, shooting hoops, dancing, exercising, wrestling, playing, movement. I have to discharge that distress from inside my body. When children are in its stress response, if we respond by sending them to their room when they're in a stress response, they could take apart the room, they could throw things, in fact, they need you more when they're in a state of toxic stress. They don't need you less, because when any of us, but especially children, are in the throes of toxic stress, remember I said there's less thinking. The thinking brain, oxygen has been diverted away from the thinking brain, and it's shunted energy into our more primitive responses. So we're not thinking rationally, we're not thinking calmly, we're not using our wisdom. Again, the same is for children and adults. If both the child and the parent are in a toxic stress response, the parent needs to first put their oxygen mask on first, because I have to de-stress my brain so I can help the child de-stress their brain. But I can't do it if my house is burning down, if I'm in a toxic stress response. So me attending to my needs physiologically, because these are neurobiological processes. They're not just something I can tell the child what to do or tell me what to do. My body has responded when I'm in a state of toxic stress. The longer I'm in this toxic stress, the worse it is for me, the worse it is for my body. So I want to really quickly attend when my house is burning down and remove the toxic stress. It's why that plan becomes so important. You really need to attend to that plan and do things, because remember, a lot of it's movement, to discharge the toxic stress from my body. And what do we see across the culture right now? We see more fear, we see more anxiety, we see more panic, we see more anger, we see more agitation. We can each individually in our interior, on the inside of our house, learn better skills to emotionally discharge the stress and get back to regulation. At any point in time, our emotional skills can be improved. Our emotional resiliency skills and competence can be improved. So let's talk about a stress response system, because this is really what I've been talking about. From the moment we enter the world, we are learning how to cope with adversity. It's an important part of healthy child development. When we're threatened, our bodies prepare us to respond, because more than any other need, this body, my body, your body, children's bodies, have been programmed to survive. So our survival needs will always take over when we feel triggered or distressed. So a young child's stress response system gets activated. If it's activated and it has supportive, loving attachment relationships, those relationships provide a buffering impact, meaning that child's distress is quickly removed. It's some of what parents' role is, or it's largely what parents' role is when you're parenting any child, not just our child. That when their distress gets too high, remember good stress and bad stress, so a little stress is okay. When that stress gets too high, that prolonged exposure to toxic stress negatively is impacting their social, emotional, and cognitive development. So that stress can get wired in to their neurobiological structures. It's why attachment is so important. Remember that side of the triangle? It's why attachment is so critically important. Because the attachment caregiving system provides a buffering to the toxic stress, meaning the parent's job is to actually remove the toxic stress and bring the child back down to baseline. Extremely important. So if the stress response is extreme and long-lasting, and this could have happened to us, if you had as a child your attachment caregiving systems impacted, if our mother was an alcoholic or our father was depressed or in jail, if we didn't have access to the buffering that attachment requires or that allows for the child, then our interior of our house could have been impacted. So we might be carrying more toxic stress and more prone to anxiety or fear or stress response. So there are three kinds of stress responses. Now we're going to break this down a little bit more because before I was talking about a difference between good stress and bad stress. So toxic stress on the bottom, see that red light? I want you to imagine it's red light, yellow light, and then green light at the top. So that toxic stress is the prolonged activation of the stress response system. So again, also don't think it's just like a cognitive process. These are bodily processes. Cortisol and adrenaline that are flooding my system, and I'm in chronic hyperarousal. So I may not be able to fall asleep at night, relax, enjoy things. I could go to the beach, a beautiful setting, and not be able to relax my body because toxic stress now has been wired in and absorbed in my body, so I can't get to baseline, that wonderful state of pleasure and relaxation. There is tolerable stress. Tolerable, so I can manage it, but I feel it. My body feels stress. And then there's positive stress that might increase our heart rate a little bit, but it's positive stress. So think of things like a soccer game when you were younger, or a math test that you took that seemed a little stressful, but then you aced it or you did really good, and that stress felt positive, like, wow, look, I'm strong, I can do these things. When we can master things, that stress feels positive because we feel ourselves growing stronger through those experiences. So positive stress are normal and essential for all of us. So if you had children through birth that weren't traumatized, most of the stress they're experiencing is positive stress. Stress can be tolerable. We can increase it more, but the buffering needs to happen quickly if you're a child, meaning the attachment caregiver is going to be removing that stress quickly. We don't want to leave children in high states of distress, which is why we don't let children cry it out. We don't let babies or toddlers cry it out. The longer their body is in a stress alarmed state, they experience toxic stress. So if you, for instance, and this, by the way, in the 70s, we were telling children this, we were telling parents to do this. This came from the old Dr. Spock days. Let them cry it out. Let them cry it out. No, we don't let them cry it out. That's toxic stress. Children don't have the emotional skills and sophistication to bring themselves back down into homeostasis. They're unable to do that. What we see happens when we leave children in those high states of distress is they have more anxiety, more stress, not less stress, because they're not getting the buffering that attachment provides to them. It's often what happened with our kids in care, that when we consistently disrupted their attachment caregiving system, where they move and they move and they move, they've had 6 mothers and 6 fathers. Attachment relationships aren't interchangeable, that each disruption creates tremendous toxic stress for them. And what they're learning is that relationships aren't permanent. They don't really remove the distress, they add distress. So some of our children have attachment dilemmas, and they don't have a secure attachment relationship, potentially even with you, if they can't receive the love and the calmness from you. Many of our children are more oppositional and defiant because they view attachment as a threat, that you're going to bring more pain and distress because of their attachment history. So the buffering didn't occur in the way that it should have. And the last one, toxic stress disrupts healthy brain and body development. So again, it's why toxic stress is the enemy, both for the child and for us. So this graph, I want you to take a look at the top layer of the graph, and this connects to what I was just talking about. Children and us, if we had a secure attachment relationship, meaning our needs are met, our primary needs. Don't think about wants, because again, sometimes parents confuse wants and needs. Like children want ice cream for breakfast. That's not a need. That's what they want. I want to play video games. That's not a need. That's a want. Primary needs are met. These are social, emotional, cognitive, developmental needs and attachment needs. Those needs are met. If those 2 needs are met, or those basic needs are met, what happens is that the parent was removing the distress. So they were removing toxic stress, and they were increasing pleasure through attachment. Think love and play and touch and rocking and feeding. So all of that pleasure through attachment and the minimizing of toxic stress sets the emotional tone on the inside of the house for the child. So that child can wake up happy and ready to play and ready to have fun, because on the interior of their house, they've experienced a lot of pleasure and joy through attachment, through relationship, and minimal toxic stress. So they're not waking up morning, noon, and night with all this stress. I want you to look at the second graph underneath where it says disrupted attachment. So think neglect, think trauma, think relational trauma, abuse. The needs are not met. That child's had the opposite. They've had minimal pleasure through attachment, so their physiological system hasn't experienced enough baseline, pleasure, calmness, structure, love, responsiveness to my needs. They've experienced way too much toxic stress, probably daily, that's been absorbed into the interior of their house. So their emotional tone on the interior is set in a very different way. These can be kids most often, if that's how that interior was set, that wake up stressed, wake up grumpy, angry, scared, fearful at night. Fearful, scared, I can't go to sleep, I'm hoarding food, I'm pacing, because their body can't relax, right? Think about the way that we fall asleep if we had a secure attachment and we've learned to find homeostasis. My head hits the pillow and I'm really tired and relaxed. That didn't just fall from the sky. My body had to learn that experience, usually learned year 1, year 2, and year 3, inside of a secure attachment relationship where my needs are met. So it's that lack of attachment and buffering, if you will, through the attachment that can maximize toxic stress, that basically fills the body with all this distress. So I want you to kind of be thinking about this dance of attachment. These steps, this is actually why it looks the way it looks. These are dance steps, meaning we have to learn this dance. We learn through serve and return. I do something, you do something. We learn this back and forth in this dance of attachment. If we had a secure attachment where there wasn't neglect and abuse and attachment disruption, so think about those non-traumatized kids out there, or maybe you, if you were lucky enough to have a healthy attachment experience, the song that you're singing on the dance floor is what I just pulled up. Can you guys all sing that in your head? I won't sing it out loud because I don't have a good singing voice, but sing it in your head. You're singing that song on your attachment dance floor. This is your relational dance floor, how you do relationships. Do I view people as loving, and am I willing to communicate my needs and allow people to get close to me? Am I eager for relationships? Do I build significant, meaningful relationships because I'm singing a happy dance? That second grid on the previous slide, where there's a disrupted attachment or relational trauma, this is what I hear on my dance floor. I hear pain when you're coming towards me. If I've had 6 attachment disruptions and 6 mothers, and I live in a group home, and I've had people hurt me who were attached to me, that relationship and attachment brought me pain. I'm not singing a happy dance on my attachment dance floor. It might be why I, as the child, see you as a threat, even though you might be the nicest human on the face of the earth. If that wasn't my experience that's been now embedded and encoded within my neurobiological structures, again, this is a sensory-oriented experience I had of attachment. So on my dance floor, I have fear. And fear is often that core feeling. And not that children are often saying this, because they're usually not, but I fear closeness. I fear attachment because I fear more pain. So toxic stress on my dance floor has brought me a tremendous amount of pain. So you can see that even a loving attachment experience isn't easy for me to move into.
Hey, Allison.
Oh,
I
what?
just want to know what time it is. I know.
We're just getting started. Okay. We're going to into questions. So I am a little behind, so my bad, but only a few slides behind. I'm already guessing people have some questions. Julianne, would you say this is a good place to stop?
I haven't had anybody put questions into the chat box yet, but if they do, I will read them to you.
Okay, so how about if I at least finish this slide?
Sounds good.
Or I'll keep going and you can just tell me, because I can hear you now fine.
Okay, if anybody has questions, put them in the box and I'll give them to Allison.
Yes. So why is attachment so important? A lot of folks equate attachment with love, and attachment is not the same as love. I want you guys at home right now, hold up your hands, and I can't see you, so I can't see if you cheat, but do it with me, because so much of what I think is important, we have to activate our senses, because we always remember better when our senses are activated. So hold up your hands, if you will, and I want you to hold them up like this. And in here is the experience of love. And love is nice. We love love. We like to give love, receive love. This is love. And now I want you to put your hands like this, all the way, like all the way out. That's attachment. Attachment, as far as you can get it, is this. Love is this. Love is very nice. Love comes out of, we learn love, we learn to receive love, and give love from the experience of attachment? And what if my attachment experiences were hurtful, maladaptive, negative, toxic? I may struggle being able to receive love, unconditional love, and being able to give love. So attachment is much bigger, because attachment initially for the child, for the baby, is all about meeting their primary needs, their developmental and attachment needs, much bigger than love. Was that you, Julianne? I heard.
No, it was not me. Someone is not muted, so you might want to check yourself. That's not me.
I heard how that. Yeah, that was super cute. So our early attachment experiences have a profound impact on how we perceive ourselves on that attachment dance floor. So if I'm a child and you're coming onto my dance floor as my parent, you're helping me have an experience of my worth. Are my needs important? Are my needs valuable? Are my needs getting met? Am I feeling loved? Can I experience pleasure through relationship? Are you holding me, hugging me, loving me, touching me? Like, I need to have this experience so I can learn it, and then I can give it back. So I learn how I feel about me. Is Allison good? Is she valuable? Is she worth holding on to? That's really important, because some of our kids have had multiple attachment disruptions where people have let go repeatedly, where they don't feel very loved because we hold on to what we love, right? Children get that quickly. Like, I'm not so lovable. You can tell me I'm lovable, but I've had 6 mothers. Why? I feel like they let go of me. And even in the moment, no matter what we say, it's often their experience, because they're small, they have little minds, so their ability to really understand what's happening and why it's happening is very limited. Their experience, especially when it happens repetitively, multiple attachment disruptions, is, oh, I get it's me. Like, everybody lets go of me. If they've never experienced relational permanency, being claimed, claiming, you're mine and I'm yours. It's putting a ring on the finger. You're mine. That I belong to you. I'm always going to be here for you. It's my job to meet your needs. That's attachment. Children shouldn't have to earn having their needs met. Like, well, I'll love you as soon as you're acting this way. Our children need to experience unconditional acceptance of their needs. And attachment comes from that. It's why it's very different than love. Attachment initially, again, is much bigger and broader and more important, actually. It is also the primary modality through which all of the child's developmental potential is maximized. When I say developmental potential, think a staircase. When they're 1, 2, 3, 4, a staircase. Each step has a different set of milestones, tasks, and needs. And on each one of those steps, there are physiological needs, like what my body needs, social needs. I have a need for connection and belonging. Emotional needs. I need to feel love and feel empathy, someone caring about my pain. Cognitive needs. I need to learn cause and effect thinking. I need to learn how to structure my thoughts and how to think. We actually train our brains how to think by living in a structured, organized world. And we have conscience development needs. A conscience is learned. I have to experience empathy in you having empathy for my needs, empathy for my pain, empathy for my toxic stress, and removing that toxic stress. Again, why attachment is so critically important. And children that lack attachment, a secure attachment relationship, don't have the buffering against toxic stress. By the way, that could have been us or you as the adult. If your attachment caregiving systems were impacted, if your needs weren't met, it can be harder or more difficult for you to meet the needs of others, because other children putting demands on us can trigger our unmet needs. I can be triggered into anxiety or distress or fear because of my child's needs trigger my internal feeling, like they trigger the interior of the house, if you will. So I want to do a moment, and I have a few more minutes, especially if there's no questions, on the neurobiology of attachment. Because one of the things, and that's kind of a big word, but I want to just boil this down into this statement, because I hear this pretty consistently from a lot of parents that I work with, that small children, babies and toddlers, won't remember what happened. So why is it important? We now know that the opposite is true. It's most important what happens year 1, year 2, and year 3, because it's when core primary structures of their brain are developing. More significantly, the limbic structures of the brain, the emotional center of the brain, is developing itself. So the first 3 years of life, it's our limbic structures that are in a heightened state of maturation, meaning children are like little emotional scientists. When you watch little ones, they're going into their world and they're looking at everybody's faces, and they're looking for emotion and affect, and they mirror that affect. Our limbic structures have what are called mirror neurons, so they're programmed to just mirror the emotion that's in front of them. So emotions are contagious from parent to child. So if the parent's looking at the child like this or looking into the crib like this, it will be that child smiles back. And it may not be that they're so happy, but they're mirroring what's put in front of their face. And our brains are brilliant. We're actually wired to do this. So it's why parent stress can also quickly become child stress. So current research in brain development has disproved this original notion. That right hemispheric growth spurt, that the emotional centers of the brain are in a heightened state of maturation. And this is really true through childhood. It is why this period and what's happening in terms of COVID-19 creates a brand new opportunity within the home environment. Parents now have a new opportunity to really strengthen these regions of the brain that have been negatively impacted by toxic stress and trauma. Because healing for children, I want to give you even though we haven't done the brain piece, remember I said top down? The thinking structures of the brain are not where emotional healing occurs. Emotional healing occurs within the emotional centers of the brain, the limbic structures. So those parts of the brain have to be activated to heal. So it is the relationship between the parent and the child that allows for the deepest opportunity to heal those emotional centers. So for instance, helping the child learn to not fear attachment, but learn to welcome in and relax in the attachment relationship, right? So instead of pushing away and being oppositional and defiant, like I fear your love, I fear connection, I fear closeness, they can learn to relax into that closeness and allow for their needs to get met. To learn that I'm not a bad child, or I'm not a worthless child, or a damaged or broken child, that I'm good, I'm valuable, I'm worth claiming, that I'm worthy of your love. I was just working with a little boy yesterday who said, I said, what's your greatest fear? And he said, I fear that I don't deserve my family. And imagine, he's young, imagine having that thought. And it is hard for him to let his parents' love into his heart. It's one of the things that we're working on. Imagine that you fear that maybe you don't deserve them because maybe there's something wrong or broken or damaged about you. So sometimes parents will have to work harder to help that child move into that baseline homeostatic experience where they can relax into attachment. It's why for parents, our emotional state is critically important. As you're moving towards your child, how are you feeling? Where is your level of stress? How do you remove your toxic stress? It's why in the beginning of our webinar, we're talking more about you. How are you feeling? And you attending and nurturing your interior, your emotional needs and states. So when you move towards your child, because they will mirror you, how are you feeling emotionally, and tune into that. And if you're in a negative or agitated or stressed state, there's things that you can do to reduce that toxic stress. to actually reach out for a different experience and pull in calmness or fun or pleasure, or even if you're grumpy, to be able to say, you know, mom's grumpy right now. Can anyone tell me a good joke? I'm feeling cranky at the moment. That we find ways to first be honest about our feelings and then show them what we're doing to label our feelings, identify our feelings, and then do something positive about them. Not hiding or ignoring them, but being really clear and concise, because they're going to be learning those things from us.
Allison, I do have a question. Sorry.
Okay, great. No, that's okay. Good. We want a question.
So this came from a social worker, and she says, what do you recommend would be the most important things that foster parents have in their toolbox when having a child with severe trauma and there are no services in place? And she said, all the resources are amazing, but don't want to overwhelm parents with all resources. So what would be the best place to start with them?
The best place to start, I would think, for any parent is to be checking in with themselves. And I would say, and I do this as well, because I'm a parent member of, in the morning and the evening, do a self check-in. A self check-in, which would start with, in the morning, how am I feeling? Again, it's the interior of my house. How am I feeling? And what do I need? And making sure that we're tuning into myself. And if I ask myself that, like, let's say I wake up and I'm tired. I go, I am feeling tired today. What do I need? Start with self. What do I need? I need to do a little yoga this morning, or I need to take a walk around the block before I start my day, or maybe I want to make some pancakes for breakfast for the kids, or put on some silly music this morning. But tuning into self, I would have parents start with the de-stressing, because any other kind of tool or little thing that we're doing sits on top of my, as the parent, emotional state, sits on me. The very best tool any parent has is their self, is me. It's actually what your child needs the most, is you. It really is why this time can be so valuable. If we're starting by taking good care of ourselves, because our children will most likely grow up to be parents one day, and we want to show them how their parents are taking good care of themselves. So there's two. I would have you start with this handout and post this on your fridge. In fact, that'll be kind of your homework this week. If you kind of take some of what I worked on in terms of your house and do your 10 things to de-stress your body. Remember, it's our body that carries the stress. So you can't ignore the body. It's often where I see parents can make the biggest mistakes by not taking care of their body, because they're thinking their stress is in their mind. The stress isn't in your mind first. The stress is in your body first. Our mind can't relax if our body can't relax. So tend to your body. Are we taking good care of our body? What does our body need? Does it need to move? Does it need to stretch? Does it need to exercise? Does it need to shoot hoops? We can still do those things, right? So our mind can be more relaxed. I can slow down my worry thoughts. If my body's not filled with all this energy, right? Remember that toxic energy moves my thoughts really fast. And I find that lots of grown-ups think a little backwards about this. We're like, I don't know how to stop my thoughts. I don't know how to stop my thoughts. I don't know how to stop my thoughts. And we're ignoring that our mind lives in our body. And we need to take a bottom-up approach. So I'd love to see you guys do this, the 10 things, and focus in on what's the plan for de-stressing the body and the mind. In fact, on that list, you can do 5 things to de-stress my body and 5 things to de-stress my mind. But again, body first, because the mind lives in the body. The mind can never relax when the body's not relaxed. So I hope that helps. Julianne, I noticed that we're out of time, so I don't know if you want to do one last question, or I do have a closing kind of poem that I'd like to read for folks I'll see them next week, but I do want to do a closing poem.
Yeah, go ahead and do it.
Okay, great. All right, everybody. First, thanks everybody for tuning in. So even though I couldn't see all your wonderful faces, I felt you with me, so it was so nice having you all with me. I want to give you some closing thoughts. It's a poem. I didn't write it. It was an anonymous person, but it so spoke to me right at the beginning of when all of this was happening with COVID-19, and we were all being asked to kind of hunker down and kind of change our routines in such significant ways. This poem's called "And the People Stayed Home." And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still. And they listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some sang. Some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently, and the people healed. I wish you all a wonderful week of attaching, de-stressing, and connecting with yourself and with your child. Take good care.
We'll see you guys next week, same time.